Good evening, everybody. I'm Nate Coulter, the director of the Central Arkansas Library System here in Little Rock. And I want to thank you for joining us in this first of a four-part series brought to you by the Central Arkansas Library System, the City of Little Rock, and the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. Tonight, we'll hear from four panelists who served on the Academy's bipartisan commission that studied democracy in America for a couple of years. Our guests from the Commission on the Practice of Democratic Citizenship are David Oxtoby, Martha McCoy, David Campbell, and Stephen B. Heintz. We've also invited a couple of local leaders with an interest in strengthening our democracy to participate with us tonight. Our local speakers are the Arkansas Community Foundation Executive Director, Heather Larkin, and Little Rock City Director, Antoine Phillips. I'll introduce each of these presenters in a little more detail shortly, but first let me go through a couple of housekeeping things. I'll remind you this is a Zoom webinar, so the only people with microphones active and cameras will be those of us who are on the panel or in presenting mode, but all of you will have an opportunity to ask questions if you want to of our speakers. You'll do that by posting your question in the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen, not the chat, but the Q&A, and I'll read them as we have time at the end to handle questions. So let's get started. Our first speaker is David Oxby. David became the president of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences in January of 2019. A chemist by training, he's not like the rest of us political geeks or political science nerds. He's a real scientist. He served as president of Pomona College from 2003 to 2017. He was a visiting scholar at the Harvard Graduate School of Education prior to becoming the president of the American Academy. Previously served as the dean of the Division of Physical Sciences and the William Rainey Harper Distinguished Service Professor of Chemistry at the University of Chicago, where he's coming to us from this evening, I believe. Dr. Oxby has been the recipient of several fellowships, including from the Guggenheim and National Science Foundations. Dr. Oxby was elected a member of the American Academy in 2012, and his appointment was announced in December 2018, and we're glad to have him here tonight. So David, why don't you tell us a little bit about the overview. Tell us a little bit about this commission and some of its work.
Thank you, Nate. Thank you for inviting us here tonight, and thanks to the Central Arkansas Library System for hosting this four-part series on our common purpose. My name is David Oxtoby. I'm president of the American Academy, and we're here to discuss our common purpose, reinventing American democracy for the 21st century. On behalf of the Academy, I'd like to begin by saying how thrilled we are that the city of Little Rock is the first champion city for our common purpose. We are grateful that all of you could be here this evening. Let me provide a brief background first about the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. We were founded in 1780 by John Adams and other patriot scholars to be a resource for the new nation. The Academy is, in part, a membership organization that grants admission to leaders in academia, business, politics, and the arts. We are also an independent, nonpartisan policy center dedicated, as per our founder's vision, to addressing the most pressing questions facing the U.S. and the world. The Academy brings together the best minds from both inside and outside our membership to develop practical, thoughtful solutions and to effect positive change. It is in that spirit that the Academy launched the bipartisan Commission on the Practice of Democratic Citizenship in 2018 in response to the mounting crisis facing American democracy. We recognize deep problems, not just in the function of our political institutions, but in our civic culture, in Americans' ability to find common ground. Last year, the Commission released its report, Our Common Purpose, Reinventing American Democracy for the 21st Century, a collection of 31 recommendations for creating a more responsive government, a more resilient civic culture, and a renewed sense of commitment to democracy. Recommendations ranged from increasing the size of the House of Representatives, to attacks on social media, to expanding opportunities for national service. You'll hear more about the recommendations and strategy from the report from Commission members later in tonight's program. Over the past few months, our democracy's vulnerabilities have been exposed by the pandemic, civil unrest, political polarization, and the erosion of many Americans' faith in institutions and in one another. This is a moment of great crisis, but also of great opportunity. Working with cities like Little Rock is one of those opportunities. We're excited to partner with Little Rock as Our Common Purpose's first champion city, and this event is just the beginning of our work together. Our aim is for the report to be a catalyst that sparks reflection, dialogue, and action to make our democracy and our communities stronger. Let me turn things back now to you, Nate.
Thank you, David. And I will point out too that I think it was David's idea that Little Rock be the first city champion of the Our Common Purpose process. So we're honored that you had that good idea and hope that we can do some of the work that needs to be done in connection with this project. So thank you very much for being here, and thank you for letting us be an experiment perhaps for the rest of the country. So I asked a couple of local people whom I admire greatly and who I think care about these issues if they would participate tonight. And first we have Heather Larkin. She is the executive and president or CEO and executive director of the Arkansas Community Foundation. And she's been at the Community Foundation since 1998. She became its president and CEO in 2008. Her work there focuses on building stronger communities all across Arkansas. She told us before we started, she's coming to us from somewhere in rural Arkansas. And I told some of our guests, they probably think all Arkansas is rural, but she's in a really rural part of Arkansas. But we thank her for taking time to join us. She's a native of rural Arkansas, as am I. She's from Charleston, Arkansas. She graduated from Hendrix College with a degree in economics and business. She went to work for Ernst & Young, became a CPA, and decided later that she wanted to be a lawyer. She graduated from the UA Little Rock School of Law. She's been a scholar in residence at the Clinton School of Public Service on community philanthropy. She serves or has served on the boards of Just Communities of Arkansas, Keep Arkansas Beautiful Foundation, Rotary Club 99, and the Arkansas Arts Festival. She was also inducted into the Hendrix Athletic Hall of Fame in 2007. So we're glad to have you, Heather, and please tell us why you're interested in these subjects.
Thank you, Nate, and good evening, everyone. As Nate said, I'm Heather Larkin, and I have the good fortune of working at and leading the Arkansas Community Foundation. The Community Foundation, as many of you know, we work in all 75 counties in Arkansas to engage people, connect resources, and inspire solutions to build better and stronger communities. So I'll say that again, engage people, connect resources, and inspire solutions to build community. And that is exactly why I'm here and we are all here tonight, and why the Community Foundation is committed to being a part of this learning process that CALS is leading. There are so many different views on so many different topics, but one that most people can agree on is that the civic health of our communities is critical, right? At the Community Foundation, we define civic health as civic discourse, civic education, and civic engagement. And we believe that regardless of all the good work that might be done in our communities and around our state and even in our country, all that good work is moot if we do not attend to our civic health. So the Our Common Purpose report work led by the Academy and the Bipartisan Commission, we believe provides us with a starting point for discussion and a starting point for action. If you have not read the report, I hope you will do so. At first glance, you might say, wow, that's a lot. But as you dig into the report and read and debate the recommendations with yourself and with others, I believe you'll begin to see opportunity. I certainly did. Opportunity for us to do more, opportunity for us to do better. We all know that our democratic heritage is very rich, but it must continue to grow and it must flex and change a little bit. And it all starts here locally in Little Rock, in our home communities, in our home state. It starts with learning, it starts with asking questions, it starts with listening, and it starts with discussion, all with the goal of building our civic health. And I'm just thrilled to be a small part of this and cannot wait to hear the panelists as we dive into these recommendations. So with that, Nate, I can say more about some recommendations, but I think the experts are the better ones to talk about those. So I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Heather. They'll give us a little bit of an overview, and then maybe we will drill down in the coming parts of the series into some of those in more detail. So we next have Little Rock's newest city director. Antoine Phillips was elected last fall. He serves as position 9. It's an at-large position on the Little Rock City Board. Antoine is a native of Little Rock, where he graduated from John L. McClellan High School. He has a degree in American politics from Bowdoin College in Brunswick, Maine, and a law degree from the University of Arkansas Little Rock. He's a partner at the law firm of Wright, Lindsay, and Jennings, where he's practiced for 10 years. Antoine also served on the board of directors for the Big Brothers, Big Sisters of Central Arkansas, the Little Rock Public Education Foundation, the Little Rock Area Public Education Stakeholder Group, and the Pulaski County Imagination Library. He was also the co-chair of something that probably has a lot of relevance here tonight for the Think Big Little Rock Strategic Planning Initiative, which was charged with strategizing ways to enhance life in Little Rock and the surrounding communities. Antoine had another virtual appearance that he was hustling over here afterwards, so we're glad that he made it, and welcome, Antoine.
Nate, I'm here. I'm trying to get my video to start. Oh, there we go.
Great, you're there. We see you. Thanks.
All right, perfect. Thank you, Nate, for the introduction, and thank you for allowing me to join and share some thoughts from my perspective. It's kind of 3 things I wanted to mention to kind of lead into the conversation today. And I'm a big fan of President Barack Obama. But he said something a few years ago at one of the conventions that I think was a little bit misleading. So I'm glad that this work is being done, because he said, "Don't boo, vote." And I said, well, that sounds great. The civic engagement is more than just voting. There's more to it than the process. Obviously, voting is the beginning of it. So glad that there's work being done to talk about all the different parts of being civically engaged, other than just going to press a button to cast who we want our leadership to look like. Quick story about civic engagement that I want to share that I think is relevant. When I was in 9th grade, I attended a private school here in Little Rock. And in Little Rock School District, in 9th grade, you typically take your civics course. Well, I was in a private school and I didn't take civics. I didn't go back to public school until 10th grade year. 10th grade, I do my regular course load. 11th grade, I do my regular course load. And in preparation for 12th grade, my counselor tells me, "Antoine, you need to take civics." And I said, well, I'm a 12th grader. I don't want to be in class with 9th graders. There must be a different option other than taking civics with 9th graders. And my counselor said, there are no other options. If you do not take civics, you do not graduate, no matter how good your grades are. So I was forced to take civics my 12th grade year. And as a person who was 18 years old, preparing to vote, learning about the process, I saw firsthand how much it resonated more with me than someone who's 14. And I think that kind of jump-started my desire to be involved in the political arena and in civic engagement. I think one thing that I saw in some of the recommendations, things that we can do across the country, we started to do here in Little Rock, so I'm gonna toot our own horn since we're here. We started a program called Rock Academy. And Rock Academy is a civic city government virtual learning session where people apply and you meet weekly via Zoom, and you talk with the mayor, you talk with the city directors, you talk with our city staff, you talk with different people in different nonprofit arenas to learn how things work, or at least how they're supposed to work, whether they're working that way or not. That's something we're doing in Little Rock to increase civic engagement, and I'm proud to be a part of that process. Another thing that I think is important, Nate, as it relates to what we're talking about, I started, me and one of my friends who's also a former state representative, Charles Blake, we started a podcast called Rock the Culture to allow people who are typically disengaged with the civic process to understand that being informed and being involved in what we do and how our government operates it isn't a one size fits all. I mean, you can be in any walk of life, and no matter where you live or what you do or your education level, what happens at City Hall or the state capitol or at the quorum court affects your life every day. And to use that medium to share how things are impacting our community has been beneficial to me and hopefully to our listeners. So with that backdrop, I just wanted to share those things that are happening in Little Rock to kind of give a backdrop to the conversation that we're going to have this evening.
Thanks, Antoine. I love Rock the Culture, and I loved it even more when we were hosting it here at the library in one of our recording studios. So we're glad to be a part of that, a little bit a part of that educating.
Well, as soon as we're in the clear, whenever that is, we will definitely come back if you'll have us, Nate.
Yes, that's what it's there for. We think it's one of the many ways we try to help get people information and access to resources and things that help them reach their potential. And participating in the civic process is one of the most fundamental ways. You know, my dad was like Barack Obama. My brothers and later my children used to always get scolded by my dad for booing at the game. And my attitude as I got older was, well, I'm paying a price of admission. I can boo if I want to, can I? You know, so if you're engaged in the process and you want to, heckle the speakers, I guess, and you want to stand on the curb and protest, that's part of the process. So you're entitled to that. So
that's part of the process. There's more to the process, though.
Yes, right? President Obama was right. You still have to vote if you want to make it have full effect.
Exactly.
So appreciate that observation. So next, let's move to talking hearing first from some of the members of the commission who were on this bipartisan commission for a couple of years. I think they'll tell you a little bit about it, but I was impressed. They traveled around the country, and we're doing it virtually after the pandemic struck, and heard from people in all walks of life across all sorts of geographical areas of the country and demographic and political areas of the country. And the first member of the panel, the first person who will address this is Martha McCoy. She's a member of the Academy of Arts and Sciences and Commission on the Democratic Citizenship Practice, and she's also president of the Paul J. Eicher Foundation and the executive director of the foundation's primary project, Everyday Democracy. Everyday Democracy is partners with local, regional, and national organizations that are dedicated to expanding and deepening democratic capacity and infrastructure. Martha writes and speaks on grassroots civic engagement, participatory governance, racial and intersectional justice, and on strengthening the emerging U.S. and global movements for participatory, equitable democracy. And she's made invaluable contributions to the fields of deliberative democracy, community problem solving, and racial justice. So Martha, thank you for being here. And we appreciate that you've taken time out from getting reunited with your father after the pandemic. We are grateful for that. That's why she has such a broad smile on her face.
That's right.
Had not seen her dad for a long time, but she's with him now. So tell us a little bit about how the report was created, if you can.
Great. Thank you so much, Nate. And I have to say, what an honor it is to be here for this launch. And I really wish I could, even though I'm having a great time with my dad, I hope I can get to Little Rock soon and celebrate with you all in person this launch. So as David mentioned, the commission began in the spring of 2018. We wanted to better understand the barriers to democratic engagement in the United States. We wanted to make recommendations that would really help improve people's opportunities for civic participation that was meaningful. And we wanted to provide recommendations that would make our public institutions work better for all people in the country. The commission was led by Eric Liu, who is president and CEO of Citizen University, by Danielle Allen, who is the director of the Edmund J. Safra Center for Ethics at Harvard University, and by Stephen Heintz, president of the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, who is here with us today. Hi, Stephen. And so I'm one of the members of the commission, which included 35 of our country's foremost leaders in academia, civil society, politics, and business from across the ideological spectrum. So despite the diversity of the views on the commission, we were actually able to reach unanimous agreement around a set of important issues that affect all Americans. It was a very interesting and inspiring and creative process to be part of. We deliberated with one another, we argued with one another, we disagreed with one another, but we were united by a shared goal to make our democracy better and stronger. And so we compromised. Not every member of the commission believes in every recommendation, but we were willing to put aside those differences in support of a greater whole. We did what commissions like these frequently do. We talked to thought leaders, we surveyed existing research, we looked at the many reform efforts that were already happening around the country. But we also did something that is less frequently done. We decided to hold nearly 50 listening sessions where we heard from hundreds of Americans across the nation in communities just like, well, not just like Little Rock, but in many ways like Little Rock. We heard from first-year cadets at the Naval Academy, refugees in Minnesota and Massachusetts, and moms from McGrath, Kentucky. We heard from people in all regions of the country, from conservatives, liberals, progressives, activists, non-voters, even from a diverse range of racial and ethnic communities, ages, and backgrounds. And as Heather and Antoine said so well, we knew that democracy doesn't happen just in Washington or just during presidential elections. We knew that democracy can happen every day as people interact with one another, cross divides to build trust and relationships, and work together to create communities that value everyone and work for everyone. We heard about some things that are working at the local level that need support and recognition and scaling. One such effort is one I had the honor of recognizing 2 days ago with a national award for a local group that is doing really powerful leadership, and that group is in Roanoke, Virginia. In that community, a group of nonprofit, public, and grassroots leaders have been working together for years and have continued throughout the pandemic to bring people of all backgrounds and views into conversations on race for truth-telling, healing, and transformation, and to provide recommendations to the city council. Very exciting. And so these kinds of things we were hearing about across the country. But it wasn't surprising that Americans from all walks of life also told us that they think our system is broken. We heard that people fear that our divisions have grown so deep that nothing can unite us anymore. But we also heard that people want to fix our democracy. And we heard a shared love of country and a shared hope for what our nation has the potential to become. The Commission's final report, Our Common Purpose, offers 31 recommendations to reinvent American democracy for the 21st century. These are 31 solutions chosen to directly address what we heard from those listening sessions. And you'll see quotes from the listening sessions when you read the report that are included in the report. What we learned across the country in those listening sessions is at the center of our ideas to make it better.
And thank you very much, Martha. I don't want to put you on the spot here, but I can't quite remember, but I thought it was so critical to what you described that everybody on that commission wouldn't have written the report with exact same recommendations. Everybody gave a little bit in order to get to some unanimous agreement about this report, I think. But what was the Benjamin Franklin quote that's in the report that reflects document, that it's not a perfect document, but it's a good one we need to get behind. I'm not going to talk about the things I'm paraphrasing. What did he say?
We actually put that up on our shared screen at our last commission meeting, which feels like 100 years ago because it was before the pandemic. But yes, we had so many rich discussions about what it would, what kinds of recommendations to bring to the fore. And I can't remember the Benjamin Franklin quote either, but we really looked to Benjamin Franklin when we were finalizing it. Good.
I apologize. That's not a nice thing to do to ask.
I've got it here if you want to, if you want to hear it. It's a wonderful quote, and it really did inspire us, as Martha said. So at the end of the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia, Benjamin Franklin stood up and said, "Thus I consent, sir, to this Constitution, because I expect no better, and because I am not sure that it is not the best. The opinions I have had of its errors I sacrifice to the public good."
And so I take it that's what some members, if not all members, had to sacrifice some of their preferences or some of their opinions about some parts of this report in order to come up with something that was held together and had such broad expanse to deal with all these issues. And that's where Dave is going to take us next, I think. He gets the assignment of trying to tell us a little bit about some of these recommendations. Dave Campbell is the Packey J.D. Professor of American Democracy at the University of Notre Dame. He's coming to us tonight from South Bend, Indiana. And he's the chairperson of the Political Science Department at Notre Dame. His research focuses on civic and political engagement, particularly how both religion and education affect American civic life. He spent 2017-18 as a Carnegie Fellow, writing a book on the politics of secularism with Jeffrey Lehman and John Green called Secular Surge, A New Fault Line in American Politics. And he's also a member of this committee, a member of this commission who had to sacrifice some of his own opinions, but he's not going to tell you which ones, as he tells us, I hope, about some of the 31 recommendations and 6 strategies. So tell us about those.
Yes, I'm reminded of another Franklin quote that we must either hang together, gentlemen, or we will hang alone.
Yes.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. I have to say, while I'm glad that we're able to do this electronically, I do regret that I'm not there in Little Rock. Every time I visited Arkansas, I've always had a wonderful time, and I look forward, as I'm sure we all do, to when life returns to something close to normal and I can once again visit lovely places like Little Rock. Just wanted to talk a little bit about sort of the thinking behind the commission and where did these recommendations come from. And as Martha noted, our view is that a strong democracy is not just about what happens inside the Beltway in Washington, but it's what people do every day in communities like South Bend and Little Rock and Peoria and Anchorage and wherever else. Because our theory is that if we're going to change things, we have to focus on our entire civil society, meaning both the culture that we have, the thoughts, beliefs, values that people hold, but also our institutions, whether we're talking about Congress or a town board or a school board or anything in between. So this is the sort of thing political scientists will debate. Should we worry about the culture? Should we worry about the institutions? And our view was, we don't need to choose. In fact, we can't choose. We need to focus on both. And we need to think about both the culture and our institutions. Because it turns out, and when you sort of look at what's happened in America over the last generation or so, we are trapped in a vicious cycle. We have unrepresentative institutions, or at least a perception that they're unrepresentative. That leads to a lot of disillusionment and a lot of barriers. A lot of Americans get frustrated with the political system and they don't want to be involved in not just politics, but just civic life in general. And that makes our institutions less representative, and on it goes. What we want to do is replace that vicious cycle with a virtuous cycle, one that builds civic faith, one that gives people a sense of hope, an idea that, yes, actually their voice matters, and that collectively as a nation, as a culture, as a society, we actually can get things done. We need effective political institutions and a resilient political culture. And so we're not just going to focus on one or the other. We're going to try to cultivate both simultaneously. I'm reminded of a time when I was very young, when I was a Cub Scout. In order to earn one of the badges that one does as a Cub Scout, I had to attend a city council meeting. I'm from a relatively small city. And so I went with my father to this city council meeting. And I'm just thinking, if you were in such a position, maybe you're a Cub Scout, maybe you're the parent, maybe you're not a Cub Scout, you're just for whatever reason in such a meeting, and all you see are the noisemakers, the screamers, the outliers, the people that are there just to score an ideological point and not because they actually want to fix something, you're likely to grow pretty disillusioned with the process and think, why should I even be involved with this? On the other hand, imagine that you attend such a meeting, and rather than the noisemakers and the screamers, what you witness are both the counselors working with one another to try to solve problems and the people in attendance also there because they represent that bulk of Americans who are just interested in solutions. They're not interested in ideology. They just want their society to function well. That's the sort of healthy culture and institutions that we're hoping that this report can contribute to. And so we identified 31 recommendations. Don't worry, I'm not going to list them all, but let me just mention a few of the greatest hits. We recommend enlarging the House of Representatives. We suggest a number of ways that there can be investments made in the civic strength of a community. We advocate or recommend creating a civic form of media and social media in particular. We call for an investment in civic learning, like civic education, not just for children, but across the lifespan, so for adults as well. We call for an expectation of national service. And one of our recommendations that I personally think is one that I hope generates a lot of discussion around the country is we propose making Election Day Veterans Day to link the idea that our veterans have sacrificed for our democracy. It would also have the advantage of recognizing that Election Day is a day where people have a little bit of time off, and so it might be a little easier for them to turn out to vote. Now, a lot of these recommendations are actually quite bold and even provocative. We have a plan, so it's not just a matter of making these recommendations, but we have a plan in place to try to make progress on each one of these recommendations. One of them requires a constitutional amendment. Some would require congressional action, but many could actually be enacted at the local level. They don't require rewriting the Constitution. They don't require even a law. They just require good people to come together and try to get things done. And one thing we've learned over the course of American history is that American democracy, American society, is very adaptable. It evolves, it changes, it rises to unanticipated challenges. And if we've learned anything over the last few years, it's that these times demand unity, they demand a sense of bipartisanship, and perhaps most of all, a sense of urgency, a sense that it's time to take action so that our democracy can be resilient for generations to come. And so we hope that this Commission's report is at least a step in that direction. I'll stop there. There's a lot more I could say. Happy to answer questions, but let me turn it back to Nate. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. After you go through 2 years of bipartisan work and you come up with all these ideas that represented this grand consensus where people had to sacrifice their own views, it's one thing to publish a nice report that looks sharp. It's another thing to then try to do something with it. So we're going to turn to the fourth panelist. Stephen will tell us what can be done to implement some of these ideas that the report reflects and some of the ones that Dave told us about. And I think the reason we've invited the local leaders here is that we want to think about the things that we can do in this community. And I think that's why the Academy and the Commission are interested in having some pilot projects like local efforts in Little Rock to see what kind of local efforts can lead to implementation of some of these. Obviously, as you said, that we can't change the makeup of the U.S. Congress or the number of seats in the House of Representatives. One of your other recommendations, I think, has to do with Supreme Court term limits. That won't happen in Little Rock. But there are things that in this report that we can think about implementing here. So let me now introduce Stephen Hines to give us some sense of what the report contemplates and its authors and the members of the commission contemplate about implementation. Because I know none of them, too much time was spent, too much energy to have it just sit on library shelves. Since 2001, Stephen has been the president and CEO of the Rockefeller Brothers Fund. foundation established in 1940 by the third generation of the Rockefeller family. Stephen is one of the three co-chairs of the commission, and he has devoted his career to strengthening democratic culture and institutions. Before joining the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, Stephen co-founded DEMOS, a public policy organization working to reduce political and economic equality. He served as executive vice president of the East-West Institute in Prague during the 1990s, so he is involved in a lot of global efforts as well. So Stephen, can you elaborate more on the plan to ensure that significant progress can be made on the recommendation? I guess in particular, how can we here in Little Rock do something to help with that process of implementation?
Well, thank you very much, Nate. I have to tell you, it's kind of a thrill to be with all of you, even though we're doing it remotely. To have Little Rock stand up and say, we want to be the first champion city for our common purpose just means a great deal to us. And we're very excited to start the work together tonight. So thank you very much for having us. And I also want to say, as president of the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, that of course, one of the brothers who founded our foundation was Governor Rockefeller, who did so much to transform the state of Arkansas. So it's also a pleasure to be in his state having this conversation. And let me thank my co-commissioners, Martha and David Oxtoby, the president of the Academy. This has been a fantastic project. It's been demanding. It's been a lot of work, but it has also been joyful work and inspiring work. And they are two terrific leaders, and it's just been a pleasure to work with them in this. So, you know, to your question, Nate, really from the very beginning, I remember the very first meeting of the commission in early 2018, we all talked about the fact that we felt like we were at an inflection point in our national history, that our democracy was facing challenges that people weren't certain it was up to solving. And we also agreed that we really wanted to do something useful, meaningful, and impactful, and that we weren't just interested in doing a study and a scholarly report. We really wanted to do something practical, and we wanted to work together to implement change, to actually work with Americans all across the country to make sure that change happens, to revitalize and reinvent our democracy for the kinds of challenges we're facing in the century, like the pandemic. So this was our kind of motivation from the very beginning. So beyond, you know, just getting the word out, getting this report in the hands of, you know, thousands of Americans, doing all kinds of public presentations in libraries and other settings, working with the press and the media, meeting with members of Congress, meeting with governors and mayors, we are committed to real progress on each of the 31 recommendations. And we've looked at the 250th anniversary of our nation's founding in 2026 as a target. By that time, we want to have achieved meaningful progress on all 31 recommendations. And we are really honored to have the opportunity to help make that happen here in Little Rock. A centerpiece of this implementation strategy is working with organizations that we call champions. These are organizations that have endorsed the report and have agreed to work with us in their states or in their communities or in Washington to try to make progress on either a specific recommendation or a couple of recommendations or the entire body of work. We now have 51 champion organizations across the country, and with Little Rock, we have our first municipal champion. And we really want to help advance these recommendations in communities like Little Rock and others all across the country. And we believe that the work you're doing and the way you're starting this process is going to inspire other communities to join in the work. Our champion organizations bring to this process just a wealth of practical experience. They've been working on these things in some cases for years. And they also have a shared commitment to the work of reinventing our democracy. They have the shared impulse, the shared motivation, but many of them are just not connected to each other. There's so much knowledge and inspiration and potential collaboration out there. And we know that connecting these champions to each other and creating a national network, a national movement of people and organizations that want to reinvent our democracy to make it more effective, inclusive, and resilient for the 21st century is how this is really going to happen. It is, as Dave said, it's really more of a bottom-up process than it is a top-down one. So we don't expect that Little Rock or any of our champions will take on all of the recommendations. You as a community will debate the recommendations. You'll decide which ones are relevant for you in the conditions that you live in. And when you do, we're ready to help. We have thought leaders and experts who can share their hard-earned learning with you. We have wonderful examples of activity from communities across the US who we think can also inspire you with their stories of what normal Americans can do and are doing, working together for the common good. And we're going to be highlighting some of them during the course of this library series. From a millennial American, a young guy who started a digital civic news source to connect people to the local government in his community, to a pastor who created a gathering place for the whole community in his town, to a small town mayor who has found new and innovative ways to get all of his constituents and not just the usual suspects involved in local decision-making and public policy. So I want to just say we are really committed to working with you in Little Rock. And I think it's so impressive that you have already a network that includes the Community Foundation. And Heather, thank you for being part of this. And Antoine, with the work that you're doing, the library system, the Chamber of Commerce, business leaders, faith leaders, students, all of us have a stake in this process. And we can all demonstrate that democracy is not a partisan issue. It's an American issue. So we're just thrilled that you've signed on to be the first champion city. And we hope that what you all do here can serve as a model for other communities around the country. And we are looking forward to the opportunity to do it together. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Stephen. And I'm going to start off the question session, if I may, by following up on one thing you said. And then if those of you who are in the audience, virtual audience, would post your questions in the Q&A, we'll get to those. But I'm interested in your observation at the end that democracy is not a partisan issue. And I raised this in the context of one of I believe David Brooks, the New York Times columnist, was one of your commission members. I think I read that.
That's right.
Last weekend, he published an essay, a piece in the Times that it was picked up locally. They syndicate his column a couple of days a week, I think, in our local Arkansas Democrat Gazette. And it was I thought a very dark piece, because in essence, what he said was that we've become a country divided between pessimists who've given up, in essence, on our notion of sort of liberal democracy, not ideological liberal, but the traditional sense that we all can talk about these things and we'll all air things, and then we'll come to some process, we'll come to some answers or solutions or outcomes through the democratic process. And he wrote essentially that for a large number of Americans, what happened on January 6th was not lawlessness, but a part of a necessary fight for some sort of cultural survival. And that those group of Americans who have that view have essentially lost confidence in this process. They're not optimistic about the democracy that we think is so important and has gotten us this far. So how do you deal with that part of the country where, as Brooks wrote us, the conversation and compromise of politics is no longer relevant. They're sort of cultural warriors. I think he used the term that they see all what's going on as an apocalyptic hellscape. How do you reimagine for those people that it's not that way, and that this democracy is worth engaging in, rather than taking up an insurrection on the Capitol?
Yeah, well, the January 6th was a very disturbing event, I think, for all of us. I mean, it was shocking to think that there are people in our country who feel that the only way they can register their frustration with the way our democracy is functioning is to storm the Capitol building and threaten the lives of members of Congress. But I think that David, who has been a terrific part of our commission and is a very thoughtful person, I think that he spends too much time in Washington. And in Washington, you know, things really are divided. Out in the real world, things may be divided, but they're not nearly as divided as in Washington. And one of the things we did in the work of the commission was to examine a lot of the data and the research that's been done. And one very important piece of research was a set of surveys and focus group work that led to an analysis of what the authors called the hidden tribes of America. This was work done by a group called More in Common, which happens to be one of our champion organizations. And what they found was that, yes, there are people who are so frustrated with our democracy that they have these kind of anarchist views, and they're on the right and the left, but they're small percentages. And the vast majority of Americans are frustrated and exhausted and have lost faith in our democracy, but they're not at the extremes. They're not ready to pick up the pitchforks and go to insurrection. What they want are simple things. They want voting to be easier. They want to be able to engage with their elected leaders in a way that is more direct. They want a local body to have hearings at a time when people can participate, not at a time when people are working or taking care of their kids. You know, what they want is to be citizens and to have the opportunity to exercise the agency of citizenship. And if we can take the steps, many of which we've outlined in the report, to give people those opportunities, as Martha said, we also heard consistently across the country that people want to be part of this democracy, but they want to be a meaningful part. They want their voice to matter. And that's what we have to provide them.
One thing that might be good for our audience is if we can get somewhere a list of those. I think you said 51 champion organizations, and you may have alluded to some of them, but it would probably give some hope to some of us who else is picking up this this effort with you guys. Someone asked a question in the Q&A, why was Little Rock chosen to participate? And I guess that may be a question that could be answered by the mayor or the city and the folks from the academy. But I'll let any one of you who wants to respond to that do so.
Well, I don't know whether David Oxtoby wants to take this question, but literally, Little Rock chose themselves to do it. I mean, we were delighted that civic leaders in Little Rock contacted the academy to say, you know, some of us have read this report, we're really interested in it, and we'd love to have a conversation with you about how we might do some things in Little Rock. So it was the civic impulse of people like you, Nate, and other civic leaders in Little Rock that brought us to this point.
During our sounding meetings, we actually didn't meet in Little Rock. We would have loved to have done that, but we chose a number of other communities. For example, we had some really great conversations in Lexington, Kentucky, with some really active civic leaders there. And that came into our report. The voices we heard there were very much part of our recommendations. And I think that's what folks in Little Rock picked up on, that other communities like this are interested in this direction. So we were delighted that really Little Rock picked us. We didn't come out and pick you in a way.
Yeah, I do think it's important for us, as it would be any group, any community, to see other communities work through these issues and what they've done to perhaps set aside their differences on some issues that might have to do with things that David Brooks is focused on when he's in the nation's capital, but how they've gotten over that and focused on the things that are important for civic practicing and citizenship at the local level.
Nate, can I just point out to your question about champions that our colleague has put in the chat links to lists of the champions and to the report itself. So if people on the webinar are interested, they can go to the chat and just click on the links.
Right, and the other thing, this is the beginning of a conversation, we hope, so that if there are people here tonight who are interested, want to engage, you can do that through your library. That's what the library is for. We want to connect you to resources that you want that help you reach your potential or be gratified, satisfied, or enlightened. And one of the resources we can connect people in this community to is the Academy and the people who are on this commission. There are a couple of questions that are similar here. Essentially, I guess in a sort of practical way, what can an ordinary citizen, which I hate to use that term, but that's what the questioner used. We're all ordinary citizens in some ways, but what can ordinary citizens, individuals in Little Rock, do to get involved and take steps to help this effort?
Martha, you want to jump in on this one?
I was just about to, Stephen. That's great. So the organization I lead, Everyday Democracy, the reason we call ourselves Everyday Democracy is just for that very reason, that there are things that people can be doing every day. But I'll kind of preface this by saying I think a lot of the recommendations in the report are about creating the kinds of supports and infrastructure that can help people work together in a community. So the example I gave, for example, from Roanoke, was that a group of people got together to say, how can we create opportunities for people across the community to come together? It's really difficult. We often at Everyday Democracy work on conversations on race. And you can't just kind of walk up to somebody at the post office, even pre-pandemic, and say, hey, do you want to have a conversation about race? I mean, that it doesn't work that way, right? But if we work together to create the opportunities where people know they're going to be welcomed, where they're going to be supported, where they're going to be respected, where their views are going to be honored, even if different views are being expressed, and where there is a place to create community together, that is something that can persist in a community and can really support the civic health and the kind of civic connection that Heather and Antoine were talking about, the kind of civic connection that helps people see beyond the sort of ideological labels that often are swirling around our heads right now, because the space that we're in is so crowded out by the noise of polarization. And so I would say that part of it is taking a first step of getting together with folks who are allies, not necessarily ideologically or even by virtue of background or party or whatever, but to say we have some common shared ideas that this community could be working better for everyone. Let's get together to think about how we create some opportunities for people to work together. And one of the recommendations that I think is really valuable is the National Trust for Civic Infrastructure. I think that's one of the most valuable recommendations. If I had to pick a favorite, I don't know, it's hard to pick favorites, but the National Trust for Civic Infrastructure is all about providing these resources, financial and otherwise, to support people who are doing these kinds of things in their community so they can connect with other folks across the country and learn from them and learn what's happening in other communities. And I think it can be very isolating when you're doing it in your community and you don't know who else is working on this around the country. So I hope that's a helpful first step.
One very specific thing that everybody in this webinar can do is to download the report and share it with your neighbors and friends and gather them with a glass of wine just to talk about it. What recommendations do they like? What recommendations do they oppose? Why do they like or oppose them? What can we do together in Little Rock or other communities? So, and we have a kind of a discussion guide as well, which we'll post in the chat so that people can organize just very informal conversations about the recommendations.
Thank you. That fits in with one of the questions from the audience. It's from a history professor at the university here in Little Rock, and he wants to focus on the report in a fall class, and he's wondering what resources there might be. Can he I guess he can get the curriculum or the things that you just alluded to, and perhaps maybe he can get somebody from the commission, if scheduled in advance, to appear by Zoom for one of his classes. So I guess we'll find him a path to connect with you folks. So he can.
I was actually going to say, Nathan, if you're out there, I'd be happy to Zoom into a class. Now, maybe you've heard enough from me, in which case I will not be offended. But
so there you go. So
if I can be helpful, I'm happy to.
That'd be great, Dave.
Yes, Nathan Marvin. If you don't have Professor Marvin, if you don't have Professor Campbell's email address, we'll get it to you after tonight. Someone has asked, focusing on public schools in our community is important. And does the report have specific recommendations or anything that would fit to what the questioner believes is the democratic crisis in and around our public school system in Little Rock?
Well, one of the things that the report does recommend is a more robust form of civic education. So that definitely would involve the public schools, and Antoine's story actually, I thought, kind of fit nicely with that theme in the report. Now, beyond that, I don't think the report does specifically call for other reforms in education, but that's actually an example of the quintessential local issue where it is possible to find consensus. It turns out both conservatives and liberals like good schools. That doesn't mean it's easy, and obviously there are different visions of how you get there. But I have found education policy is actually something I've worked on over the course of my career. There's a lot more consensus actually at the local level on education policy than you'd be led to believe if all you read were think tank reports in Washington.
Yeah, I guess one of the issues that it goes to self-governing is how people get elected to the school boards, what days the elections fall on, who's influencing those elections, which might go to some of your recommendations with regard to campaign finance. School board elections in Arkansas have not traditionally generated very much in the way of campaign contributions, but there may be a time when that's going to change if there are struggles over public school versus public charter schools, and those sorts of issues create more tension and controversy in the democratic election of school board governors or school board directors. Someone asked,
if I could just add quickly to that, Nate, I wanted to say that I think education, like policing, like our justice system, are all parts of democracy that we don't often think of as that, right? They are the parts of like our lives that are most touched by public institutions, where the institutions frequently have gone about their business without knowing that there are ways to effectively engage with the people they are serving. And so I would say that part of the supports for what should be happening in communities are supports for people doing that real everyday work of, for example, school boards and school systems coming to some skill sets where they can engage with all members of the public, including members of the public who are often least likely to be at the public table and the most marginalized. So how do public systems do that? Same thing for police departments. We all know there's a crisis of that in our country right now. And like democracy, there's a national problem, but there's also a very decentralized problem that really needs to be grappled with locally. And so in all these ways, I think that there are places that the conversation can begin. And when it comes to, say, the politics of local school boards, that could be part of the community's conversation about what kind of governance do we need as a community for our schools to achieve the kinds of schools that we need to have for everyone. So it's an exciting question. I think that it's so fundamental to who we are as a democracy, our public schools.
One of the problems with getting people to run the school board, though, has been the fact that of late our newly elected school board in Little Rock has been having 5- and 7-hour meetings. I'm sure that's a hardship on the citizens who are participating by being elected to the school board. And I think on your point too, I saw somewhere over the weekend, maybe pick on California, but somebody was railing when all these people want to run for governor in California, or attorney general in California, and somebody says, run for sheriff or prosecuting attorney, if you're unhappy with the way the justice system is working, the criminal justice system in particular, run for these county offices that have so much potential to affect the day-to-day outcome of the way we police and prosecute people.
Yeah.
So I think we're out of time. Let me ask, this is not really a question so much as an opportunity. Someone wants to know how they can get more involved on a local level with the work that Antoine and Heather are doing. So if you guys would maybe post your email address in the chat or something, if you can, that I think that was an anonymous question that individual can figure out a way to connect with you two locally. So let me again thank all of you. I know Darshan had given us an hour, and you guys have been generous to give us your time. I don't want to go over time, and I don't want to keep people who've signed up tonight from thinking we might become like a Little Rock School Board meeting and they don't want to sign up for any more meetings. But I would urge everybody, if you've been interested in some of this and you think if you follow Stephen's advice and get the report and you see other things that are in that very thorough document and you find something that connects with you, that resonates with you, sign up to come to one of the subsequent sessions. They're going to be essentially every 2 weeks, May 13th, May 27th, and June 10th, as Little Rock tries to get itself or its mind around some of these issues and where we then might go in terms of trying to implement them. Even if it's doing things, as Stephen says, talking to your friends over wine or coffee, or having people look for opportunities where they can engage, like Antoine's podcast, finding ways to connect to people, particularly people who are alienated from the process, is important. And I think one of the issues that comes out of this discussion is nobody has answers to all the problems, but I guess by your being here and you're spending 2 years, you're affirming your faith that there are ways to improve the democracy and strengthen our capacity to govern ourselves, despite all of our differences. So
Right.
I'll thank you again for all of that. Thank everybody for joining us. I know I mentioned at the outset, as they say on airlines, when you used to do those, you know, we know you have choices. You could have signed up for another library program tonight. We had Roxanne Gay on another one of our library channels tonight. But for all of you who showed up tonight, we thank you and appreciate your time, as well as the presenters and the 4 panelists. Thank you for your service to this important report. And I would urge everybody who wants to sign up for all of the remaining sessions, if you would. And we're going to try to come up with a way, I hope, to survey participants so you can pick some of the topics that we would take up in a subsequent session. But go to cals.org, the library's website, cals.org, and you can find a link there to register for a subsequent meeting. So thanks again, everyone, and have a good evening.
Thank
Thank
you
you,
all.
Nate. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you
Be
all.
well.
Mhm.